Committee of the Whole is back from recess. Senator Castro, we left off on you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That one of the priorities of the administration was to, and I quote, collect taxes, $9 million in recovery in terms of owed taxes. And I think it was even seriously considered as it's part of the revenue forecast. And my question is specific line in the budget.
We are back from recess. I just wanted to make it very clear, Senator Castro, thank you for the document you provided. We are discussing Bill 186, that's 35, which is the budget for 2020. You asked the question, it reflects what happened in 2018 in this budget? Of course not. You won't find what happened in 18 in 2020. You won't find what happened in 19 in 2020. Because 2020's budget is a projection which we hope that my colleagues would adopt. Now, we'll go back to your question now. So if you wanted to know what happened in 2018, I was the oversight chair of Revenue and Tax, and there was a collection of, like you said, 29, almost $30 million. There's also a loss to the government because when you do the tax amnesty, you waive the equal amount what you collect. It was a good thing then because the government of Guam was in a financial crisis. We didn't do a tax amnesty in 2019, and I don't believe we're projecting a tax amnesty in 2020. So your question now, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think I'm clear on the sequence of dates, like the OPA was when the OPA authored this particular piece that I referenced earlier. And while it may not be reflected in this fiscal year's budget request, I think it's important to take into consideration the fiscal trends that have been with the territory that are based on actual revenues. And so to bring my point home, and then I'd like to follow up on my question, the first question. So to make my point, if there's 70 million outstanding in tax liabilities, I remember very painstakingly sitting here and hearing an argument about the possibility of going after those taxes aggressively to make up for any potential budget shortfalls, but in this case, as a revenue consideration as part of the appropriations, Bill 186. And so my question was, if these monies were realized, and as a matter of fact, it's not even an assumption, it states here very clearly $29 million in collections, would anybody on the panel happen to know what was this dollar amount? What was it carved from? Was it $100 million? I don't think it was dollar for dollar. So what was the total pool that we potentially lost to collect from? Was it $100 million for which there was a tax amnesty at $29 million? Or was it $50 million? Would anybody happen to know? And the reason why it's relevant, Mr. Chairman, is because if it was from a $100 million pool that these parties, individuals, or corporations settled at 1/3 that amount, or 33% of that amount, but there still remains another $50 million in tax liabilities, that's something I'd like to consider over the weekend and into next week when we start talking about this year's projections. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Does any BBMR or OAB want to comment in reference to the collection back in 2018? No, there's no comment. Senator Amanda Shelton, did you have a motion you wanted to make?
Yes, Mr. Chair, I'd like to move to allow our legislative counsel to make any technical corrections necessary to the bill.
No objection.
No, there's no objection. Motion passed. Okay, I have between Senator Munoz and Senator Kelly, so she said her question is short. Senator Munoz?
Like I try to keep everything else. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So actually, maybe it has already been answered, but I was reading an article that showed that nationwide the average tax refunds is down about 16%. I don't know if does this apply to here on Guam as well too? Tax refunds. Because I know that if the taxpayer didn't adjust any of their withholdings, surprise to them, maybe they're getting less money or they're now paying. So I'm just wondering if this article even applies to Guam at all.
Senator, I think you'll find that the incidence, for instance, of EITC is probably higher on Guam than on the mainland. So probably if you're looking at the average tax return, it's probably higher than 16%.
Okay. I was just wondering if it would affect us at all.
Senator Kelly.
Hathade, Sejus Masi for everybody for being here. This question is similar to one that was asked previously, but we hear certain things, even though for the U.S. our economy is doing pretty well. But there is discussion, especially as of late, that there could be the potential for a recession. So since this is your field, I wanted to get your understanding of the likelihood, how you gauge or assess the likelihood of the U.S. having a recession next year.
Thank you for the question, Senator. In my readings over the last week or so, I did come across an article that indicated that economists throughout the United States are actually anticipating a recession to happen in 2021. There's no specific reason as to why they're feeling or saying that. My further readings also indicate that when I look further into the article, it had to do a lot about politics, the timing of things happening. So the date that they were indicating is 2021, I found was very unusual, simply because they provided no justification for why it was 2021 and not 2020. And without any data to support their statement, it was hard for me to at least try to dissect, whether or not there was any validity in their statement. And that's all I know about that one.
Sejus Masi, I had read some information about it being involved with the U.S.'s trade policies and some of our approaches. So with that, I do have some questions, but they're on the next page related to the rainy day fund. So I can wait until we close this one, but it gets back to that idea of what we're doing to prepare for a situation like that, either for the U.S. or we've seen with Japan or other areas that are very closely connected to us through the visitor industry and other things. Just wanting to make sure that we're being fiscally responsible and that we're doing something to prepare. We're still dealing with the fallout from the tax cuts that happened at the federal level. So, but anyways, thank you for your assessment on that.
Thank you, Senator Kelly. Does anybody else any of my colleagues have any question for page 2? There being none, this section, page 2 is now closed, and that's general fund revenue, A, B, C, D. We will now move to page 3. We're now at the total general, we're at the,
Just a point of information, I just wanted to verify, Mr. Chair, that we did bookmark this earlier this morning.
no, the initial intent was to bookmark it, and that's why when we open up for discussion, I asked if there's any other questions, and there was no other questions. If you had a question, you could have asked it, but it's closed now. That's why I asked the question. If there's no further question, then we'll close page 2.
No, Mr. Chair, I believe there was a request to bookmark this section. You reverted from the presentation of OFB, citing that the numbers are exactly the same on the budget bill in page 2. Thus, we're carrying over that bookmark, so it allow us to later on go back there. It still was still requested on the floor to do so by Senator Castro. So I just wanted to clarify that this page is bookmarked, maintains its bookmark, so we can revert back.
No, we changed that, Senator Titlegy, when we went back and we moved from the slide, and everybody agreed, we'll move to page 2, we go to the bill. It cleared all that and all the questions that need to be asked. That's why I keep looking left and right and asking if there's any question, because we need to understand that as we move to the bill, until we complete page 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, actually all the way into page 9, we can't even get to the agencies. And if we're going to keep on going through each of the revenue generating, we're not going to know exactly where the agency stands. So we need to move forward, and that's why I asked, if there's any question on 2, we move on. If you want to debate any of the appropriations that are identified for the agencies, we can do it then, and you can reduce it. You can ask for an amendment to reduce that agency in that form. So unless there's, unless you have something for page 2, if you want, you can ask it now, but if you're looking at asking it later, we have to
Actually,
move on.
Yes, I do, Mr. Chair. I reserve the right to go back to and bookmark this page. That's what I asked.
Okay,
Quick recess, Mr. Chair?
let's take a quick recess. We're back from recess. Is there a motion to overrule the presider? Yeah, the chair. Is there a motion to overrule?
Yeah, I make a motion, actually, the motion I'm making, Mr. Chair, is not to overrule, but to allow the clerks to go back to the video and the script showing that we bookmarked this area and that we still reserve that right.
Senator, is either your motion to overrule the presider, I ask the question, if there's no motion to overrule, then we will continue on. Is there a motion, ma'am?
Yeah, okay, I make a motion to overrule, sorry about that.
No problem.
And roll call.
Yes,
Mr. Chair, this
there's
would,
three. There's three roll, they're asking for roll call. Roll call?
point of information, Mr. Chair, this is just to open it, to reconsider whether to go back to revenues, page 2. All right.
That's correct.
Senator Castro?
Ongyan.
Senator Castro, aye. Senator Lee? Senator Lee, nay. Senator Marsh Titano? Senator Marsh Titano, nay. Senator Moylan?
Aye.
Senator Moylan, aye. Senator Munya? Senator Munya, aye. Speaker Munya Barnes? Speaker Munya Barnes, nay. Vice Speaker Nelson? Vice Speaker Nelson, nay. Senator Perez? Mr. Chair, I move to excuse Senator Perez at this time. On that,
There's a motion to excuse Senator Perez. Is there any objection? Motion carries.
Senator Perez excused. Senator Rangel. Senator Rangel excused. Senator San Augustine.
No.
Senator San Augustine, nay. Senator Shelton. Senator Shelton, nay. Senator Titagui. Senator Titagui, aye. Senator Pt.2. Senator Pt.2 excused. Senator Therese Terlahi. Senator Therese Terlahi, aye. Senator Torres. Senator Torres, nay.
Motion to overrule, 5 ayes, 7 nays, 3 excuse. Motion fails. My colleagues, before we go to page 3, we are going to go to page 3. I am going to read the rules of engagement so we can move along.
Mr. Chairman.
One more time.
Just
Hold
point
on,
of
Senator
information
Castro.
real
Let
quick,
me
sir.
just, hold on. Let me just read this section so that we can have a clear understanding. For sections of the bill, in section 1 on revenue projection, the chair will consider each general fund and special revenue category, and that federal grants and aid in sequential order will go down through it sequentially one by one. Each revenue category shall be deemed closed once every member who wishes to speak has done so, and the chair has gavelled that the revenue federal grant in aid item closed. Once I ask you if there's any other questions, and I close it, it's closed. I mean, if you want anything else, ask all the questions you want. I'll give you all the opportunity. But once we close it, I ask straight up, let's move from there. Okay? So we are now on page 3. Senator Castro, Senator Castro had a question, then
Wait
Senator
a
Tello,
minute,
you
Mr.
be
Thank you.
next.
First of all, thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. If I could just follow up on my request this morning, just for a copy of that section of the rules. We don't have to recess for it, but if I could just get a copy of that so that I know when I need to chime in before the section or the revenue category is exhausted. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Senator Tello, you have a question, ma'am.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And, I have to say I'm very disappointed in those who voted nay on allowing us to go back to page 2. Minority in this legislature had very little time to look at this budget bill while everybody else had the opportunity to look at it. So not allowing us to go back and voting no, what are you hiding?
Senator Tello, do you have a
So,
question for
Mr.
page
Chair.
3?
Well, I'll come back. Tell you what, I'll come back. I'll allow my other colleagues to speak, and then I'll come back.
Thank you. Do you have any question for page 3, ma'am? Senator Moylan?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Questions on page 3, yes. As I digest what happened on page 2 and then come to the grand total of total general fund revenue, and I appreciate also all the information provided in the slide, and especially on the consolidated revenue and expenditure report, and digesting to come to this total general fund revenue on page 3, line number 4. I'm understanding that we're tracking really good, which I'm happy to hear, and it's a favorable favorable report according to the CR-ER report. And as expressed earlier, with the excess of 41 million, of course, after the footnotes, and using a conservative view, between 14 and 12 million in excess after that, based on how we're tracking. And then also hearing other statements made during the report on page 2, coming to this final total on the general fund revenue, to include all these taxes that we're hoping we should be collecting. And looking at how our government has done some increases in pay raises and other things, it should come as no surprise that, of course, I want to make an amendment to the total general revenue funds. So, Mr. Chair, I'd like to offer an amendment, and I ask that my amendment be passed out, please. The amendment is being passed out. So, of course, this is going to reflect an adjustment in the total general fund revenue on page 3, item E, line 3. Okay, let's just give it a minute as the amendment is being passed around. Okay, if everybody has a copy of the amendment. Okay, Mr. Chair, my amendment is for to include line 9 on page 9. It's to amend the bill to read, Section 7 is hereby added to Chapter 1 of the General Provisions to read as follows. Chapter 1, General Provisions, Section 7, Business Privilege Tax Decrease.
Senator Jim,
Mr. Chair.
you're identifying line 9, page 9? We're only on page 3. If you want, we can apply that on when we get to page 9.
I just was looking at where we're at in this section for the total general.
Page 9 will reflect, when we get to that, it will reflect the total amount of,
Okay.
guys, the grand total on page 9 is, you're only looking at 96 million. And that does with debt service. If you want it, that'll be on page 6, which will be line 1, or line 2, which identifies available for appropriation 645. Otherwise, then you're addressing page 3, line 4. So your which one did you want to address? Based on your amendment, it's line 9 or page 9. I think is wrong. So I mean, you may want to do it as a page 6, line 2, or a page 3, line 4. Something to do with reduction. Now, understanding, Senator Moylan, that notwithstanding any provision of law, privilege tax shall be 4%. You're talking about reducing by 1% the BBT, which will impact every agency in the Gulf of Guam. And then based on the rules, it's pay as you go. So if you can identify the agencies we're going to reduce, what you're reducing, then we'll address it. I have no problem with that one. No, it's clear. Your amendment is clear, but just can you identify an increase or a decrease in appropriation or funding must be accompanied by a corresponding and specific offset or funding source. So if you could identify that, we can address that.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Going back to your recommendation, I guess that will probably be better on page 3, as you suggested. But where this will come from will be on the BBT tax, on the reversing that from the 5 to the 4%. So that will be across the board on that section, Mr. Chairman.
Point of information, Mr. Chair.
Yes, Senator Nelson.
Are we, where in page 3 are we going to insert the BPT tax decrease? And then I'm thinking that when we do this, or if we do this, there has to be another bill made to compensate for that decrease in BPT. So the sponsor has another bill to present for us because of the impact that it'll have on this current bill. I'd like to see it also, so we know what agencies we are cutting from this 4% BPT. I mean, I think it'd behoove us, if we're going to decrease the BPT, to have a bill showing where the rest of the money will go then, and the impact to those agencies. Oh, so the point of information was where are we putting this in page 3?
That's correct?
Yeah. Oh, I'm
Okay.
sorry. It's an inquiry, point of inquiry.
Okay, let me address, and then.
That's
Senator-
to the sponsor of the amendment, Mr.
Okay.
Chair. A point of inquiry, where
Okay,
are we
it's a point
putting
of
this
inquiry for
provision
you.
in at page 3? What position? Because it was page 9 and now we're at page 3, so just,
If I'm understanding the question correctly, Mr. Chair, can you reiterate that, please? The question again, please?
so the amendment that the sponsor moved forward is on line 9, page 9, and there's been back and forth recommendations where this will be. So the sponsor then is now moving it to what page and what line are we making it reference to so that we can see the impact in the calculations that are laid before us.
All right, thank you.
Senator Moylan?
Thank you. So what I'm understanding, based on your discussion, Mr. Chair, that the amendment could fit is better placed on, under section E on page 3, if that's how I understood you, making the adjustment to the total revenue, general revenue. Is that correct, Mr. Chair? It's based on your recommendation.
No, I'm not recommending anywhere it be gone. I'm just trying to make it very clear that what you're asking for, in line 9, page 9, is you're talking about the debt service, and we're only on page 3, and if you're going to identify in page 3, I would only assume that you're trying to go after the total revenue, and you're trying to find a way to reduce it. And like I said, the rules are...
Point of order, Mr. Chair.
Yes, Senator Lee.
Thank you. Actually, 2 points of order. So it's my understanding that the BPT, that section, has been closed. And secondly, so that just rules this amendment out of order, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Senator Moylan, you still have the floor. Senator Lee, can you just repeat what you mentioned because he didn't hear it?
Yes, Mr. Chair, just a point of order. We have already moved forward on page 2, so this amendment is out of order. We have already accepted the items on page 2 based on the rules that you very clearly allowed us to hear at the beginning of the discussion and have just recently repeated. So we just need to be clear about the rules of engagement going forward and make sure that all of our colleagues are aware of the rules, and when you call for additional questions, or you were also very clear, Mr. Chair, that these amendments needed to be provided to the clerks, needed to be passed out in advance. We were all made aware of these rules, and so I think that this should be ruled out of order.
That been stated. Senator Moylan.
Thank you,
we've
Mr.
already
Chairman.
passed page 2. Your amendment is out of order.
I respect the question. I do disagree. I think we're still talking about revenue, total revenues. And on the page, it discusses total fund revenues. This is still a revenue page. We're talking about everything coming in. After seeing all the generated revenues, then I still feel it is within means to ask for my amendment.
Can Senator Moylan, let's take a quick recess. Come on up. We have, we're back from recess. Senator Moylan, we have an understanding already? Ruled you out of order. The amendment is out of order. We
Mr.
passed
Chair.
that. We're on page 3. Yes, ma'am.
Point of personal privilege. Mr. Chair? Just a point of personal privilege. I think any assertions that any member of this body, minority or otherwise, didn't have ample time to review this bill as amended is really troubling, especially when a member of the minority voted to pass Bill 186 as amended. It's in the committee report very clearly, Mr. Chair. Not voted to report out, but voted to pass. So these amendments they're interesting to me because if you're voting to pass something already, you're voting to pass it as is. I understand that we all want to have the discussion, and I think that's really important. And I also think it's important that you lay out the rules in advance, which you have done, Mr. Chair. We all are understanding the rules of engagement, and it's important that all of the members follow these rules. We all have the opportunity to be present at the beginning of these proceedings, Mr. Chair, and hear these rules of engagement. So now, as we move forward, we need to all abide by what we've agreed to in the beginning. Thank you.
Point of information, Mr. Chair, or point of privilege as well,
Thank you.
Mr. Chair.
Yes, ma'am.
The
Senator Tello.
opportunity for all of us to have the same amount of time to look at this budget bill and go over it. If I were to ask certain senators that are the majority how long they've known about this information, I'm pretty sure they're going to tell you a lot longer than when we received this Bill 186. A lot longer. So to allow us to go through this thoroughly, giving us the opportunity, it's not only fair, it's right and just for us to do this, to do our due diligence. So pushing through this bill just because it was given to us, only how many days, and we only have 5 days? When I was in the 30th Guam Legislature, we had 3 weeks to work on a bill, a budget bill. And now we're only given 6 days to do this? So, Mr. Chair, I want everyone to know out there that we did not have the same privileges as the majority.
Thank you, senators. We are on page 3. Does any senators, any of my colleagues, have any question for page 3? Senator Kelly, you have a question for page 3.
Pungin. In looking at the licenses, fees, and permits, I know that there was an effort and there is a statute to review these on a regular basis. So I want to know if there was indeed that review and that ability to right-size these fees so that there's cost recovery and not a burden of cost on the taxpayers. To what degree were we able to have that done, and is that figured into the licenses, fees, and permits that we see here?
Senator Kelly, the fees, the amount there is based on what's today. There has not been one bill introduced to raise any fees so that the government can start recovering from their expenditures. So this is based on what is recorded today. It's tracking on what they're collecting based on any of our taxpayers coming in to apply for licensing or any permits. That's how it's collected.
I believe there was an effort, though. Is that effort still ongoing to collect that understanding then, to be able to evaluate it so that we are right-sizing and not making a burden of cost on our taxpayers? Is that at least ongoing?
Yes, that's still ongoing that I'm aware of. I'm still waiting for all the agencies to submit to the oversight chair asking that their fees go up because they're finding out that the cost of the license that the individuals are paying for, it costs more to produce it than what they're paying. But until such time the agency submits it and we have a hearing, then we'll know. But there is a tremendous amount of concerns out there from to include specifically more revenue and tax. Because of what they're charging, they've determined that their fees are so outdated. But it has not been submitted yet. We're just waiting for that.
So, Judge Masi, it's important to hear that that process is going on because we do need to right-size it. We do need to make sure it's not a burden of cost on our taxpayers overall. Also, I had mentioned wanting to visit what's referred to as the rainy day fund. So there's an amount noted here for the 2% general fund reserve, deficit reduction / rainy day fund. I was looking for it in the special fund update handout, and perhaps I missed it somehow, but could we get an update? It's so important to have a fund like that. We're still recuperating from some somewhat unexpected issues like the federal tax cuts. So it just really underscores that even while things are so fiscally tight right now, that it's important that we are indeed setting aside something. So perhaps from BBMR, we could get an update at what level, what the amount is in the rainy day fund.
Thank you, Senator. Currently, there's no money in the rainy day fund.
I see. So the amount that we're putting there will be the amount of the balance once it gets there. And yeah, just in looking at that angle of being fiscally responsible, it's extremely hard to keep that in mind when we are dealing with the issues that we're dealing with now. What assurances do we have that that fund, like other funds, many other funds, is safeguarded from transfer or use?
Thank you again for that question. On page 135, there is a description of the mechanics of the rainy day fund. I would like to point out, though, that the way that this is written, it says deficit reduction / rainy day fund. We would hope that the legislature would consider putting this money in the rainy day fund and not keeping it for deficit reduction. You started out earlier today, ma'am, by talking about the need for reserves. I appreciate that very much. If I recall correctly, funds in the rainy day fund require 3/4 votes of the body. So the burden of 8 is increased to 10 for any access to the funds, and it's outside the governor's transfer authority.
It's to Judge Masi for that response. I'm wondering if I'm looking at a different version. On my page 135, it only has 2 lines. Did you mean page 135?
Yeah, 128, sorry. I have the marked up or the track change copy, so it's on 128, sorry.
Senator Marsh, you still have the floor. Are there any other inquiries or amendments that you'd like to proffer at this page?
Not at this time, but I reserve the ability to come back to it.
I will consider that. I do know that there's a time. I will make the allotted time left for you to come back. Anyone else on page 3? Senator Telo-Taitigui, you are recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. You know, I want to talk on the Highways Fund here on page 3, but, you know, I don't know if I can continue speaking on it because the balance is on the other side on page 4.
Senator
So
Taitigui,
what do you, how do I, yeah, so how do I do this?
Senator Taitigui, please, we're on page 3. If you want to talk about item number M, you're more than welcome to talk
Madam
about
Chair, like I said, Madam Chair, how can I speak on it? I just don't want to be out of order because
Senator
the
Taitigui,
balance is on 4.
Senator Taitigui, please, page 3, state your question or your concern or your inquiry. The panel up here will be able to answer if it's a request. Please.
Like I said, if you look on your paper, Madam Speaker
Senator-
or Chair, you can see that the remaining balance is on 4, so I don't want to be
go
out
ahead
of
and
order.
make your statement, Senator. I will decide. Please go ahead and state your concern or your issue or your
Very
statement.
inconsistent, Madam Chair, just for the record.
Madam
as
Senator,
I'm-
please proceed.
I will, but very inconsistent. Page 3, Guam Highway Fund is showing 25,194,124. After the subtraction of the Public Service Fund, oh wait, I can't go to page 4. Should I wait or just keep going? I'm not going to be ruled out,
Senator
right?
Tello, I am allowing you to speak. Please go ahead and make your issue or your statement. Thank you. Please proceed.
So the total amount is, on page 4, 23,954,145. Now, if I'm not mistaken, first, what funds this account? What funds this account?
What funds item number
The
M?
Guam Highway Fund, yes.
Thank you. Mr. Steve, what funds item number M, Guam Highway Fund?
It collects the the liquid fuel tax.
Okay. So the liquid fuel tax, and as you know, it was passed in the last year, I think for FY18, an increase of the liquid fuel tax. And whatever money from that, when it began in January of 2018, until the close of the fiscal year, October 2018, there was a significant amount of money that was generated from the increase of the liquid fuel tax. How much money is that? I've been trying to call DPW on this. They haven't given it to me. Do you have those numbers?
Would you like to answer that question? Do you have an answer to that? You have to note that you don't have the answer.
Senator, if you're talking about the period from January to September of 2018, is that the period you're talking about?
The time that it was, so it was last year.
So it would be
Yeah.
about 9 months worth of revenue
Right,
collection.
right.
I don't have that figure now, but I can get that to you.
Yes, because with that number, when you projected for the Guam Highway Fund,
This is 2018 levels, right? And this is what we're projecting?
because in FY 2019, it was 22,808,668. That was the projected revenue for FY19 last year, or this fiscal year. And you're increasing that amount to 23,094,000 plus. So I wanted to know why you increased it, and yeah, so I want to know why.
Thank you, Senator Taitigui. Mr. Guerrero?
Senator, the total collection in the Guam Highway Fund for 2018 amounted to about 18.5. What we're estimating for 2019 is 21.1. So we see a slight increase, maybe of about 2.3 million over 18.
So that amount of money came from the increase of liquid fuel tax that began in January of 2018 all the way through was an additional 2 million?
If we're going to start from January, like you're saying, that's only about 9 months worth of revenue collection for 2018. So if we're going to look at an increase of 2.3, maybe 2.3, you can safely say attributed to about 9 months worth of collection, and add on another 3 more months of collection to that, might round off to about 3 million.
Okay, so Steve, if I'm not mistaken, we normally, what comes into the highway fund on the liquid fuel tax before the increase, before we had that increase in liquid fuel tax, what was the amount coming in then?
Can you repeat that one more time, Senator?
No problem. So before the liquid tax fuel, and the increase from the liquid fuel tax, before that was done, how much money revenue came in one fiscal year before the increase?
I don't have the 2017 revenue numbers right now. I only have 2018. But
Okay.
just judging from 2018 numbers compared to 2019,
Okay.
there is a $2.3 million increase.
Now, because I want to make sure, Steve, that the increase is additional revenue since the liquid fuel tax came into play, not like you're consolidating, everything at once. I just want to know how much from that increase. Okay. And so I'll wait for that answer as soon as you get it, and reserve my time.
Okay.
For,
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you.
Any other questions for page 3? Senator Moylan, I know you have a question. You also have an amendment you're going to proffer. So are you ready? Or you?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We're making some copies for the amendment now.
Okay. Does anybody else, any of my other colleagues have any questions for page 3? And if not, we'll wait a minute. We'll do a recess so that the amendment of Senator Moylan will be passed out for page 3. You have questions for page 3? You have an amendment also, or are you just questions? Okay. Yes, Senator Therese.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Is the source of the Customs and Quarantine Inspection Services Fund, could you just specify that, please? The source. Where does that money come from?
I believe, Senator, this is coming from the passenger fees.
All right, so
and
all of
also the cargo when they do the inspection down at the port, if I'm not mistaken.
It's from the passenger fees.
So only from the airport passenger fees, all of this, right? Okay.
Okay.
And then, I just wanted to ask about this 2% general fund reserve deficit reduction. This is what's mandated by law currently, right? I'm looking at 5 GCA 2, or I think 5 GCA 22436. It says general fund appropriations cap. I know this was not done in the 2019 budget, but this is what we're trying to comply with here, that the legislature shall not appropriate more than 98% of the total revenues. All right. General fund revenues. Okay.
That's correct, Senator.
The amendment from Senator Moylan is still being reproduced. Senator Lai, you still have more questions?
All right. No, Mr. Chair, that's all.
Okay. Does anyone have any questions? If not, we'll recess until we get that amendment out. Oh, you have it out now? Did everyone get a copy? We haven't gotten one up here. Why don't we recess for just a short recess? My colleagues, we are back from recess. The amendment that Senator Moylan was going to proffer, he has withdrawn it. That being said, is there any questions for page 3? I will look very slowly from left to right. Is there any questions? Yes, ma'am. Senator Therese Terlai.
Just want to make sure.
Yes, ma'am.
Is there any of these special funds that gets revenue from tobacco sales or taxes on this page? I know the Healthy Futures does.
Yes, Senator, the Healthy Future Fund.
That's on the next page, right? Okay,
It's on the
just want to
next-
make sure before we change the page.
on
All
the
right,
next
thank you.
page.
Okay.
I will ask again. Is there any question for page 3? Senator Nelson first, and then followed by Senator Tideway.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The Enhanced 911 Emergency Reporting System Fund. This is to understand that the governor already paid back what was withdrawn from the previous administration. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. And so does this include the amount that was paid back? Or does this just include what was the revenue from this fiscal year?
Now, the revenue from this fiscal year is on top of what was paid back.
I'm sorry, Mr. Burns, can you
The revenue from this fiscal year is in addition to the repayment of funds from previous years.
Okay, so this 2.165291 number, the 2,165,291, is inclusive of what was paid back?
No,
It's just the revenue.
This is for 2020.
Okay, so this is just revenue. Okay, thank you, Mr. Burns.
Senator Tideway. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, earlier I asked OFB if they have that number yet of how much additional revenue generated from January of 2018 when the liquor fuel tax increase came into play for that 9-month period. I'm still waiting for that.
What was the question one more time?
So again, Mr. Chair, I asked earlier for the numbers on how much money was generated from the increase of liquid fuel tax that began in 2018 of January for the 9 months to the end of the fiscal year. How much money was generated? Additional revenue from the increase.
Mr. Byrne or Mr. Lester, do you have the answer to that question?
Roughly $2.8 million.
So, Mr. Chair or OFB, when you had the additional amount here, okay, so in FY 2019, you had $22,808,668. So you're increasing that amount in Bill 186 to $23,94145. So you're doing only an increase of about what, 1 million? Less than 1 million? Wait, I have my calculator. What's the difference between the FY 2019 budget for Highway Fund compared to the one in Bill 186? Maybe your calculator's faster than mine, but.
We're looking at, Senator Tello, I'm just going to try to follow along with you.
Highway Fund?
You're looking at the line 26, correct? Because I know that the amount you identified is on line 4, it's on line 2 or page 4.
Ooh, yeah, I know.
So I'm following along where you're identifying how Guam Highway Fund has 25, and then because of the negative of the transit
Yep, yes.
moving
it's-
money, it got down to 23.
Yes,
So-
Mr. Chair. So
okay,
my question is,
yes.
from FY 2019, you had the amount at
08,668. However, in Bill 186, it's 23,944,54. So my question is, I'm trying to get my calculator out to see what's the difference. The increase is how much from FY19? Minus.
I believe, Senator, it's about 1.1 million.
And yet the increase in liquid fuel tax was considered in making this this amount at where you have it today instead of increasing it a little bit more?
As I said, Senator, in the beginning,
Projected.
when we do these projections, we look at the tracking, but we also consider and we try to be a little bit conservative. We don't normally estimate exactly the amount of what we're tracking. We try to be a little conservative and have what we call a little cushion just in the event that things doesn't materialize throughout the year.
Steve, was there any additional revenue from the highway fund from its projected amount in FY19? So far, is there any additional tracking, any
Well, just remember,
additional revenue?
going back to 2018, if you compare 2018 with 2019, we saw for at least the first, since January, the first 9 months of collection in 2018 was about 2.3 million. So if you're going to span that 2.3 million out for, I mean, if you're going to take that amount and consider out for, I would believe, 12 months, I would think maybe we're looking about 3.2 million more. So if you add that to what we were tracking back in 2019, what we're estimating at the 25 million for 2020 would probably be around the mark, about $1 million less.
So so if I were to add another $1 million to this amount, I'm still being conservative.
When you hit the mark, when you're doing estimates and you get to a tracking level, conservative is not taking that tracking level. Conservative is dropping it down to give a little cushion in the event revenues don't come in.
So, Mr. Chair, I'd like to make an amendment to page 3. However, it would have to reflect in the next page, page 4, which we are not on. So, bookmark. I know. So, my amendment is simply changing on line 26 to 26,194,124, and reflecting that same change on page 4 from 23,954,145 to 24,954,145.
Okay, so Senator, tell her it's to increase the projection on line 26 by 1 million is what you're
By
saying.
1 million, yes.
Since that is amendment, can you give us that in writing and then tell us how you want it proportioned out?
Okay,
There's
sure.
5 agencies that are impacted by the liquid fuel tax, and I prefer we maybe recess so you can get the agencies and you can identify how you want it proportioned out.
Okay, Mr.
Okay.
Chair, I'll be happy to make that amendment for the Guam Highway Fund.
Yes.
Okay, to increase this amount as an amendment. However, to identify where that 1 million will go to, I reserve that for as we get closer to as we go through each page. We're going to go through this page by page.
Yes.
We're going to actually get to a section where it authorizes by law how we spend the special fund money in the Guam Highway Fund to appropriate it. Because my intention, Mr. Chair, is to ensure that the special funds that are codified by law on how we spend it goes exactly what the law intended for. So if you allow me that time, once it comes to that section, I'll be happy to appropriate that funding to that area. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'll get it in writing.
If we can get that in writing, and then we can identify it from there. Okay? Is there any other questions on page 3?
Are we still, Mr. Chair?
We're still on page 3?
Yes, are we still, okay, so Are we going to proceed with the amendment by the previous speaker?
We're going to wait for it in writing. Remember, the rules, is when you identify the additional money, you have to identify where it's going to go. I understand we're going to go to the budget, we're going to come up with where it should go. We're going to tell you straight up, when we go to recess, if you want to know what agencies it impacts, we can tell you what it impacts right now, the liquid fuel tax. So those are the agencies that it would normally go, not unless the author of the amendment wants to put it somewhere else. But like I know that some of my colleagues have expressed throughout this 8 months or 7 months that special funds should go to where it was intended to go. So I mean, I would wait, and we'll, Senator Nelson, do you have an amendment or a question? If not, we'll recess and we'll give it a few more minutes for the amendment to come out.
Yes, Mr. Chair, we should recess to
Okay,
address this amendment
thank you.
because there's going to be a lot of questions following,
All right,
because you're
so
increasing a revenue.
we'll recess at this time. We are back from recess. We are now at Senator Tello's
Amendment?
amendment.
Yes, thank you, Mr.
Everybody
Chair.
has received a copy.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for the legislature. The clerk's office assisted me in preparing this amendment and Mr. Chair, it simply what it does is increases the Guam Highway Fund. Its projected revenues of $26,194,124 for, $25,194,124 to $26,194,124. And Mr. Chair, the intent of this increase will go to Department of Public Works for the funding of village streets and roads, resurfacing and repairs to our village streets, Mr. Chair, which I will proffer that amendment once we get to page 59 of the budget bill. But in the meantime, Mr. Chair, this increase would be basically proportionally met through the liquid fuel tax, aviation fuel tax, diesel fuel tax, the mass transit surcharge or diesel fuel, as well as the auto surcharge on other fuels. That's it.
Thank you. Speaker Tina Munoz-Barnes, you have
Si Zeus Masi, Mr. Chair, I'm looking at this amendment from the good senator of Hagåtña, and I'm just wanting to make sure I get this right. The amendment is to increase the Guam Highway Fund from $23,954,145 to $24,954,145. Am I right? If the
yes, that's her amendment.
yes, and that, sir, from the Guam Highway Fund, can you maybe Mr. Carlson can answer this question for me? Does the Guam Territorial Highway Fund? I'm really sorry. The information provided to us is really tiny, but is it from the liquid fuels tax? If you can tell me exactly where every single fund, where it's coming from?
Madam Speaker, on page 2 of the special fund report, halfway down, you'll see the composition of the taxes that cumulatively result in the Guam Highway Fund amount that is reflected on page 1. They include aviation fuel, diesel fuel, other fuel taxes, as well as the mass transit surcharge on diesel fuel and the auto surcharge on other fuels. That is about 70% or so of the, or 60% rather, just rough numbers of what cumulatively funds the Guam Highway Fund. The other major contributor is vehicle license and registration fees. So the vehicle license and registration fees is somewhere in the neighborhood of about $8 to $9 million.
So, Mr. Chair, if I may, if I'm looking at this closely, from changing the amounts to increase the $23,954,145 to the $24,954,145, is it clear to say that it would be an increase to the taxes in this provision? That we would be increasing these, the liquid fuels tax, aviation fuel tax, diesel fuel taxes, and the GRT, the license and registration?
Point of information, Mr. Chair.
I'm just
Point of
asking.
information, My amendment only simply adjusts the projected revenue for the Guam Highway Fund.
So I'm asking the
Its
question.
intent was never to increase taxes. That's all. I just wanted, for the record.
Okay, Speaker, you have the floor.
So I'm asking, Mr. Chair, if the good panelist, Mr. Carlson, could answer that.
You know, I'd like Mr.
Guerrero?
Guerrero to also...
Any panel member?
Well, you know, when you look at what it is that collectively results in the $25 million Guam Highway Fund amount, and then the apportionment to the Better Public Service Fund by statute, and then the Public Transit Fund, and then additionally this fiscal year, there was money that went to GPD and Mayor's Council. So with the rates and charges, taxes that are currently in place, we look at the $25 million amount cumulatively from current registration fees, current taxes on fuel. The only way to be able to raise this amount is to raise the taxes on the fuel and the cost of vehicle registration.
So, Speaker, Mr. Guerrero, can you speak on reference to that?
Yes, Senator. I just want to reiterate one thing on the Guam Highway Fund. You know, in 2018, what was appropriated was $22.7 million for 2018. What was appropriated for the Guam Highway Fund in 2019 is $24.25. What we're projecting this year on the Guam Highway is about $1 million at 25.6. So we feel that, and OMB's projection is only 55,000 off from BBMR's projection. So we feel that our projection, our estimate for 2020 is is kind of like on the mark, and anything above that will be I wouldn't feel comfortable even going there. I mean, that's
Point of
just-
information, you mentioned FY 2018 was at 22 million. Actually, it's FY 2019 was at 22,808,000. Can you give me that number again for FY 18? How much?
22.7 million is what was appropriated for 2018.
Kind of the same amount in 2019, correct?
And the amount based on the audit for 2018
Yeah.
is actually 23.1.
So there was an increase then from what you actually,
Yes.
that actually came in. So it was appropriated that 22,707,000 in 2018 was appropriated. However, in 2018, 23 million came in. Is that correct? And then in FY 2019, you have appropriated, well, the budget for FY 19 only had 22 million.
24 million. It's the
In FY
FY
19?
19. So what
After
we're,
taking out the Better Service Fund and the Highway Fund?
that's the amount that was appropriated, that was estimated for the Guam Highway Fund in 19.
But Steve, I'm showing here in FY 19, it was 22,808,000. So I think what's happening is you probably didn't take out the the Better Service Fund and the Public Transit Fund. And then
Yes,
it comes
yes.
out to 22, correct?
Yes, you
Okay,
remind us.
Okay, so and as well as 2018, you had 22,707, which after you taking out the Better Service Fund and the Public Transit Fund. So you're looking at really no big, huge increase to 2019, even when the liquid fuel tax increased. So being conservative, 1 million really is around the ballpark of any type of additional increase.
Yeah, 22.7 million is the gross. Okay, in 2018. Yes, but just bear in mind what we're projecting for 2020 is 25.6. That's why I say we grew it a little bit, but anything more than 25.6, I just don't see it materializing or happening.
I'm sorry, Mr. Chair, just wanted to make it clear that my amendment does not increase taxes for liquid fuel tax. It only increases the projected revenues. That's it.
All right. Speaker.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. So again, just for clarification's sake, from the panel up here, based on the amendment proffered, can I get a clear understanding on the question proffered? Is this considered an increase in taxes?
I think Mr. Guerrero was very accurate in his statement about where our projections were and where their projections are, and the nominal difference between the two. I think the only way to get $1 million out of what it is that we currently have is if one of those items, either the tax on one of the fuel components or the cost for vehicle registration was adjusted. I don't think consumption of itself, but in and of itself, is going to be the driving factor. As a matter of fact, with the aviation industry, I think we're all aware that Cebu Pacific is pulling out and Air Busan is pulling out. We're comforted by understanding that there are other Korean carriers that are picking up the load, and that Japan Airlines has increased their flight frequency and aircraft. So those were factors that we thought would still be able to achieve revenues in those categories with respect to aviation fuel. But, you know, consumption of, if you look at the special fund report on page 1 for Guam Highway Fund, you'll see a very, flat trend in revenues. 2.2 million, 2 million, 2.1 million, 2.2, 2.1, 2 million, 2.1, 2.0. I mean, it's almost consistently, the actual collections are pretty stable with respect to what it is that's been collected. And our tracking is 25 million. The adopted level was 22. So, the levels that we're talking about, and the 25, the tracking is 25,085. So the Guam Highway Fund amount here of 25,194, as Mr. Guerrero mentioned, is very, very close. So I'm not real sure how consumer tendencies and spending are going to, and then also the increase in vehicle registrations. I mean, I know we have a finite amount of vehicles. We're selling vehicles. I get it. They got to be registered, but I don't know if that is going to materialize in another million over what it is that's currently contained in the bill.
Mr. Carson and Mr. Guerrero, thank you very much. So, Mr. Chair, just based on the presentation, I'm just going to respectfully object to this motion based on the presentation provided to me. Cesar Masi.
Yes, Senator Tello, you can close.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, as we know that there's growth in the economy, and with that, projections are made here today on assessments. You talk about how GVB has been coming out almost every other month with new numbers and figures in tourism coming to our island. We know that there is actually increased flights coming from Haneda. We just heard about that. They're trying to open up 12 new slots from Japan coming over to Guam. And that's incorporating. However, you want me to hold on one second?
If you can hold on, I
Okay, Mr.
apologize,
Chair.
Senator Tello. I just want, does any other colleagues want to speak reference to the amendment? In reference to the amendment, okay? Senator Kelly, before you close.
Sejus Masi, Mr. Chair. As As much as I like and support the intentions of where the money would go, hearing both BBMR and OFB say that they feel uncomfortable, you know, I say this because I think one of the most harmful things is to overestimate, and I think that's why we would lean towards what the numbers are tracking and perhaps be a bit conservative. Like, we're seeing the pain of some of these agencies who are coming to us because by the millions, their appropriations were not fulfilled, and thereby they didn't have the ability to plan. And so at the end of the fiscal year, they were just caught off guard, $16 million short or something short. And I think if the numbers had been those that would have at least allowed them to plan, that does seem to make a lot of sense. So I just wanted to bring up that point, although, like I said, I do really support the intentions of where this money would go, because we need assistance everywhere, and the assistance would go to a really good cause. But I really worry about the danger of overestimating if our advisors feel uncomfortable and then kind of setting them up to deal with a crisis at some point as they end up possibly being short.
So is that an objection or kind
Point
of
of
split?
information?
Okay. Does any of my colleagues want to speak to the motion? Senator Therese.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm sorry if I missed this in the earlier discussion, but can you just remind us, when did that tax take effect, the increase in the liquid fuels? Was it fiscal year 2018 or 2019?
I can answer. It came into effect, it was passed in September of 2017, incorporated into FY18 budget, and was implemented in January of 2018.
So it didn't go in effect until January 2018, okay. And so the issue is that the sponsor of the amendment is more optimistic than OFB or BBMR as to how much we will be collecting. And the current tracking, and she's basing that on the current CRER that's tracking already 25 million in that account. All right, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Senator Lee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to make sure that I'm understanding this correctly. So, in terms of OFB, Mr. OFB Director, would you say that you support the rationale behind this increase?
Senator, the only thing that that I remember is that a request was made to increase the Guam Highway Fund by $1 million. My question is, you know, using the methods we've used to come up with the estimate for 2020, which includes trackings, which includes history data, historical data, taking out whatever anomalies or one-time occurrences. We feel that the amount that we've estimated is an amount that we feel that will be generated and will materialize. Anything above that, I wouldn't feel comfortable simply because there's nothing to support the increase other than what we've already tracked to date. And so that's how I'd like to answer your question.
Thank you. And I think in response to a previous speaker on this amendment, there was a question that was posed to the BBMR, and Mr. Carlson had mentioned that this increase is unattainable. Those are the words he used. So I think maybe just to kind of put it into perspective, we are understanding that the proposed increase is so unattainable that the only way that we would be able to meet it is to increase taxes. I think that was the question. It's not necessarily that we're increasing taxes to do this, but the only way that we would be able to get to this point is to increase taxes. There's no other kind of organic way that $1 million would be able to appear. Is that correct, Mr. Carlson?
That's accurate, ma'am.
Thank you very much.
Go ahead.
Can I just ask one more
Yes.
question? All right, so on the projections for July, for the Guam Highway Fund, it shows all the actuals, but then when you get to August and it's projected, it's about $200,000 less than all the other actual collections. What explains that projection being less?
It's based upon historical collections, the average that we take into account over a period of time, not just the reflected amounts, but as I did mention earlier, ma'am, if you were to go ahead and just add, basically on the August number, it's like $118,000 different than the July number. So, and then the September number is back up to 2,081,000. So the numbers that I gave were very consistent. The only one that dips is the August number, and that number is 200,000. It's like negligible.
Right, I know. I'm just trying to figure out what happens in that month that causes that dip.
Oh, it's just a projection, ma'am, based upon, again, you know, when we like the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, you've got data that is based upon a new adjustment with respect to certain amounts of fees and charges. In this case here, there are 4 or 5 elements that make up the totality of the liquid fuel tax, or the Guam Highway Fund rather. It's liquid fuel taxes, vehicle registrations, all those kind of things. So, you know, again, you know, the tracking still has it at $25,085,802, which again is very close to OFB's $25,194,124.
Yes, I can see all that. The only thing I can't see is what I'm asking, what causes that dip in August versus all the other months. But
Yeah, and again, ma'am, it's negligible, all things being considered.
because in June, when you submitted your earlier report, Mr. Carlson, you were only tracking 24 million something, and in July, it jumps. Well, it was 24,890, so it's not that far off either, but it was, yeah, I guess that's why I'm just curious what changes, you know, the tracking. If you've got this already projected for the future months, what changes that tracking? But I don't know if you have anything to add, but it's okay, Mr. Chair. I'm satisfied. Thank you.
Well, you know, like I mentioned earlier, if you look at the projection that the Bureau of Budget came out with and the projection that OFB came out with, there's only right now a difference of $55,000. And anything above, I mean, we can probably appropriate 55,000 more to cap it and make it the same. But anything above that, you know, it's like you said, some months are good and some months are bad. We can't explain why one month there'll be a dip and the other month there'll be an excess. We just hope that the variance between the months are something negligible, so as we go and we calculate for the remaining of the fiscal year, we at least hit the mark, or at least the estimated levels that we're trying to get at.
Is there anything further, Senator Therese? Nothing? Does any other colleague would like to speak on the motion or on the amendment? None? I'd ask Senator Tello to close.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I do appreciate the dialogue. However, you know, when asked the question by one of my colleagues about explaining the dip, it seems you can explain where you're going to get 25 million or how 25 million is going to be projected by the highway fund, but when there's a slight dip, you can't explain that. It doesn't make any sense. Here we're projecting. And Mr. Chair, I want to make it clear. When it was asked, in order to get $1 million, you would have to raise taxes on this, it's not true. Economic growth comes into play. If I were to ask what was it tracking in 2018, if there was excess in 2018 in the highway fund that was projected in 2018, was there excess? I believe there was. And if you look at 2019, that what we're tracking now, is there excess? Yes, there's excess. So there's your trend. These villages need help. These roads need help. That is the number one concern that I heard during my campaign, our roads, our village roads. And the only way for our village roads to get paved and repaired is through general fund money. We don't get federal funds for that. So, Mr. Chair, I know there's an objection to this, but I kindly ask my colleagues to think about all those the concerns that you hear from your constituents as well about our roads and how it desperately needs help. This is $1 million only. And we know that even with the oversight chair understands that $1 million would probably only do, what, 1.5 miles? But this is a beginning. This is an opportunity for us to take a chance. And again, this does not increase taxes. This just puts the projection at something that's been trending for the last 3 years. And that trend is that it exceeds the projections for the last 2 years. And now they're projecting at 25 million. So, Mr. Chair, I humbly ask my colleagues to please consider this, and that those who are watching today understand who really is intended to help the village roads. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Tello.
Point of inquiry.
My colleagues, there is an amendment.
Just a point of inquiry, Mr. Chair.
Yes, Vice Speaker, Majority Leader.
I understand the importance of our roads, and I share the same concern as the previous speaker. And there's been a little we've been going back and forth about how this revenue is going to be achieved, this $1 million. And, you know, there's mixed messages saying, oh, you're going to have to increase the tax. And the previous speaker's like, that's not the intent. So just so that we don't move away from this message, we're not trying to increase the tax. That we reiterate, we are not trying to increase the tax. Perhaps because this is a projected amount, and there's been a lot of information coming in and out about whether or not we'd be able to make this $1 million additional appropriation, is there a way that we can put this in a provision somewhere that if the Guam Highway Fund exceeds any dollar amount that exceeds the current appropriation, go towards the Guam Highway Fund? And I think the previous speaker, if I'm wrong, wanted to move it towards DPW to fix the village road. So I was wondering if we can do maybe that approach, that anything that exceeds this appropriation that comes from the liquid fuel tax will go directly to DPW for fixing the village roads, if the sponsor would be amenable to that.
Thank you. A short recess. We are back from recess. I recognize Senator Pt.2. Ma'am.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I greatly appreciate my colleagues finding a compromise here which makes good sense all around. And at that time, I would like to withdraw my amendment and work on an amendment later on in some other pages that would allow for us to use any excess revenue generated from the liquid fuel tax or from this section to be appropriated to DPW for the repair of roads, village street roads. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I thank you to my colleague from Jigo.
From Zico. Thank you, Senator Tello.
Thank you.
The amendment has been withdrawn. Is there any more questions for page 3? There being none, page 3 is closed. It is now 5:07, and I'll move to recess until 9 o'clock Monday morning.
May I amend that to 10 a.m. Monday? the
Okay,
recess?
yes,
Thank
Madam
you,
Vice
Mr.
Speaker.
Chair.
We'll recess until Monday morning at 10 a.m. Thank you. Sharp.